Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our second episode of Customer Service Game Changers. It's a series where I chat with leaders who set a new bar in the industry so that you can learn how to deliver outstanding customer service and stand out from the crowd. So we're happy to be here with you for the next 30 to 40 minutes. And today, I'm so excited to speak with Parker Conrad, who, according to LinkedIn, works in customer support at Rippling. So Parker, tell us more about Rippling.
So Rippling is a company that builds HR, IT, and finance software for small businesses. And the kind of critical insight or sort of differentiator is this idea. We think that almost every business system is full of information about employees, and that employee data is an unacknowledged primitive across a very wide range of business software, including software well outside of HR. And that by sort of doing this stuff all in one place, in one system, you can really dramatically cut down on the administrative overhead of running a company.
Great. Here are some stats I think about Rippling. And I think the question I had for you is, okay, so you have this title, Customer Support at Rippling, on LinkedIn. How many people a day reach out to you either to offer you a job or tell you about the million problems they might have encountered? Tell me.
So actually, I mean, I get a few recruiter pings for support roles, a couple times a week. And then I think a couple times a week, I'll get, maybe once or twice a week, get a message from a customer who is, in one way or another, sort of caught, sort of things are gummed up for them and they're trying to reach someone to unblock it. And so this started out, interestingly enough, this started out because in the early days of Rippling, we very purposefully did not have a support team until very late in the game. And so we were about 5 million in ARR and probably at least 1,000 customers before we hired our first customer support rep. And until then, I did support every day. I sort of personally probably did about 20% of the tickets each day. And the engineering team did the rest. And so we would route support tickets like to the engineer that was actually working on that product, and they would resolve the tickets. And so this idea that sort of everyone was sort of like deeply involved in customer support was like a very real thing at Rippling from a very early point in time. And then eventually at some scale, we started professionalizing the function and bringing in, and building a support team. And I think I've invested very deeply in that since then. But at the time, my title was customer support. And I left it in place for two reasons. One, because I think it communicates something important about sort of the priorities of the company. But two, also because it does kind of it invites customers to reach out when they feel like they're not getting anywhere. And usually I can sort of help unblock it for them, and sort of figure out, sometimes I'll just, won't even involve someone else in the company, and I'll just, they'll have a question, I'll sort of respond and do the support over LinkedIn. Sometimes I can get the right people in the company involved to kind of move things forward for them.
I love it. And I know that later on I'll ask you a few more questions around this. Really like it. So I'm excited to ask you a lot of questions today. The first thing I wanted to ask you is, both of our companies decided to make their customer support metrics public. And the reality is we did this because you did this. So we were inspired by your call to arms, and it's been amazing for us, but you started it. So tell me what inspired you to do this.
It was a few things, and it started with the fact that I think, Rippling is, I mean, not anymore, but sort of as of a few years ago, is probably a relatively newer entrant into the space. The company launched in 2017, 2018, depending on how you count it. And one of the things that we started to see, and that I think a lot of new companies see, is it's very easy when you're competing in a deal against an incumbent, the incumbent rep, it's such an easy way to sow FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They say, oh yeah, Rippling, like great demo, looks really good, I'm sure. but I've heard the support is terrible, you know, and we knew that wasn't true. Like we could see like the actual ratings on Glassdoor. We knew the internal data and the CSAT scores, and we knew the comparison versus our competitors, and we knew that our support was actually way, 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 way better. But it was this constant thing that was coming up in deals and in calls with prospective customers. And so we're like, how do you just really take a sledgehammer to this thing? And we were like, you know what, we're going to just publish our data. And by the way, there was a lot of value, I think, to holding our team accountable. And like when we started publishing the data, like the data improved very quickly. Like there was something magical about it. Like the eyes on it were like, the focus was much higher once we started publishing it publicly. But it also really, it completely turned the conversation around for us about support, because in deals, we would say like, look, you know, every company claims to have good customer support. Like we're the only ones that back it up with real data. And our competitors don't do that. And the reason they don't do that is because their data doesn't look very good. And so you can see like the third-party ratings on things like review sites like G2 Crowd, where we score much higher than them, but you can actually see like the real internal measures. And these are not, you know, these aren't scrubbed. You know, you can see like, you know, the weekend that, you know, SVB failed last year, when suddenly, I mean, obviously we just had like 10x the support volume. You can see the metrics get like really bad, you know, as we were kind of under the gun. And so like, we're not, you know, it's very real. And it gives people a lot of confidence to say like, actually, like, look, if I can get to a human being, you know, on average in less than 30 seconds, then I feel pretty good about that.
You should. And when you did it feel risky, or in maybe a related question,
really
was your
risky.
team scared? Yeah.
Really risky. And it was a thing, it was a thing that I asked our marketing team to put together. And our marketing team was deeply opposed to it. And the support team was also deeply, like people were not happy about this idea. I mean, I think people have sort of come around to it now, but it was at the time, it was like, this is a crazy like Parker initiative. And that, you know, and it was one of those things where I asked for it, and you know, like it sort of kind of people were like, yeah, but it didn't happen. And then I was like, where is it? And sort of gave them a deadline, and, you know, and so it eventually it went live, and it was really transformational. And one of the ways in which it was transformational is just the ways in which it forced us to improve our metrics. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about sort of what are the things that worked for us to get our metrics to the point that it worked. I saw someone ask like, wait, 30 seconds to get, you know, to get to a rep. And yes, actually, I think the mean right now, or the median, is now about 20 seconds to get to a human being. And the 90th percentile is a few minutes. And you can see these actually directly on our website. If you go to rippling.com, there's a link right at the bottom to real-time support status. And we share median and 90th percentiles for both our response times on chat, our email response time, the percent of the time that live chats are converted to a call, because you can convert it immediately to a video call, the percentage of cases resolved by first, second, third, and fourth responses, and CSAT scores. So we try and provide an overall picture of, you know, speed and quality and resolution times and all that stuff.
And if you had to stack rank the benefits, would you say that initially you did it because you wanted to improve win rates in deals, and that at the end, like after having done that for a few years, like you feel like the best thing is it forces you to improve support, and like quality of support is directly related to the health of your customer? Or do you think win rates is still at the top and the reason why?
You know, I think it's both. You know, it's both things are super valuable. And like behind all of it was just this like sort of deep and seething anger that I had, that like we weren't getting credit for like the support quality being so good. And that like our competitors were actually using it as a web. It was just, they were just lying. They were just like, oh no, the support's terrible over there, you know, and there was no way for us to combat that. You know, because, you know, if you're a newer company, you're somewhat of an unknown quantity. And so, you know, already prospective customers perceive some risk in moving to your system. And so when a competitor tells them, oh, your support's bad, and you don't have like a very concrete way to disprove that, it's quite effective. It's quite an effective strategy that competitors can pull against you. And so that's why I think doing it so publicly is so powerful, because you know, our competitors would never do it. Like you're never going to see Gusto do this,
Right.
because like their stats are terrible. And you're never going to see, you know, Paylocity do it, because their stats are terrible. And so that's, you know, that like, and obviously when you show that to a customer and you explain that dynamic, they're like, yeah, okay, I get it. I believe that.
Yeah. And when your metrics are amazing, it makes so much sense to publish them. But what happens, and you mentioned the SVB weekend, what happens? Like, what do you do concretely when your metrics starts to sleep?
Well, the visibility into the data makes it hard for them to slip, except in these like acute scenarios that I think generally customers, you know, will forgive you for, given sort of, you know, the sort of what happened that weekend. The things that I have found to improve support, the first like really big sort of insight for us that changed things overnight was looking at 90th percentiles instead of medians. And so we publish both. But the important thing to improve the metrics was to focus on the worst 10% of interactions rather than the medians. And that was like a tough sort of mental change for the support organization. And actually at one point, what I did is I told the support leaders that they were not allowed to report internally on medians. The only thing they could report on was 90th percentiles. And like, that was hard because they were like, well, the 90th percentiles like don't look very good. But what happened is, you know, we looked at, when we first started doing this, I think the time to reach, this was before we started publishing the data publicly, the time to reach an agent on chat was, I think the median was like 7 or 8 minutes. And like now it's 20 seconds, right? But the 90th percentile was like an hour. I mean, it was crazy. It was super bad. And the problem is we had sat there and like we had been focused on the median, on like the, you know, the 7 or 8 minute figure. We're like trying to bring that down, and it just wasn't happening. We couldn't get it down. And then when we focused on the 90th percentiles, which were like an hour, what happened is it was like the causes were so obvious. It was like, oh, we have like the chat queue opens at, you know, 7:30 a.m. or so. I'm making up, I actually don't know what time it opens today, but it opens at this time. And, you know, a bunch of the agents that are supposed to be on that queue have one-on-one scheduled with their manager at that time. And so they're not on the queue. And so people sit, you know, and it was like nobody had like realized this, but like once you sort of like, it's like the causes of the 90th percentiles were a lot more tangible. And it was much easier to identify what they were, because you're looking by definition at the sort of edge cases, the exceptions, the violations. And one of the things that we discovered is this was effective, one, because it allows you to identify a much smaller and more discrete set of underlying causes, but two, because it is impossible to improve your 90th percentiles without dramatically improving your medians. And so the only thing we focused on was improving the 90th percentile, like the worst 10% of our interactions. And what happened is like magically over the course of like 2 weeks, the medians went from like 8 minutes, like down to like 1.5. I mean, it was unbelievable. And we'd been trying for months to do this. And once we focused on the 90th percentiles, that was the thing that magically fixed the medians. Like once we did that. And so one of the first things that I would encourage anyone that's trying to improve their support to do is to look only at the 90th percentiles. Like just, don't look at the median interactions, because the median interactions are not what defines you. And it's very hard to like change them. But if you focus on the worst cases and you just systematically keep chopping off the worst 10% of causes, your medians just slide all the way down. Like the distribution shifts very dramatically. And the other thing that we discovered was really the importance of scheduling and workforce management. And like really managing the schedule, because like, that was the thing that we discovered was like not quite right. It was like, we needed to have people starting earlier. We needed to have some coverage to clear the queue over the weekend. We needed to make sure that people weren't doing one-on-ones during like the peak hours, right? And so once we started like understanding, what were the sort of demand patterns and how did we make sure that our capacity plan matched the demand patterns, that was the thing that really changed things very dramatically for us. And actually, interestingly, the tool that we use for this internally is a rippling product that hasn't launched yet. And so we're going to be launching in a few months our scheduling product that is what we use internally to do this for our support org. It's like really cool. I mean, it's not obviously not announced publicly yet, but would encourage when it comes out, anyone that's in a support function to check it out and see how you can, because this is how we get internally to these, 20-second sort of first response times with a human in our support team.
I love it. We've talked a lot about the metrics and the data through the metrics, but something you mentioned to me is that you also believe in the value of anecdata. So can you define that for the audience and how you measure that at Rippling?
Yeah, I think the data is, we use the data to be like, are we doing well? But it's almost impossible to diagnose anything with data. And so what I have found, and this is like a general thing that I try and do, like running the company at large, is like, I find that like, excuse me, dashboards and data are largely useless. And what's really useful is sampling, the anecdata streams. And so, what that means is like, look, if something is broken in sales, you're never going to find it in the data. You might find that like, well, your numbers are down, but like, you don't know why. And the way to figure this out is really to go all the way to ground, and it's to listen to 20 random gong calls with customers. On the support side, you want to look at like the last 30, you want to sample the last 30 support interactions. Just actually go and see what the customer's questions are, how your reps are responding. You want to, one of the ways that we would do this at Rippling is and still do, we echo, like every time someone gives us a negative CSAT score after a support interaction, we publish that to Slack. And in Slack, you see like, the customer, the specific, like who the person at the customer is, their title, some information about what Rippling products they've purchased, how big they are, basic customer data, and then like links to see, the account summary, the actual support interaction. And what you're doing is, as you're getting these, every single day, what started at first, what would happen is I would go in there. And so like I would start and like I would go into each of those interactions, I would look at it, and I would start tagging support leadership on like what happened here and why did we do this and why, and you start to notice patterns. And it, like patterns that would not be obvious in the data, but you look at a few of these and you're like, man, there's this problem where we're doing X, or like our support responses, like as an example of like a problem that we saw at one point that I think is crops up in support organizations is, people were, using like the passive voice too much. There was no acknowledgement of accountability. And like, even when oftentimes when it's the customer's fault, like that's the worst of all. When you're sort of saying like you're making it sound like it was like your fault, and you have to sort of be like, look, I'm going to solve this for you. We're going to make this right. Here's why, you guys did this, and that's why, the system actually properly responded to that. And it sounds like you didn't intend that. So like, let's fix it for you. But like, you got to be very clear about what happened and sort of always, talk in the active voice, always take ownership. Like if it is your fault, of what's going on. But, it's hard to notice those types of things and understand exactly where the gap is if you're not going like all the way to ground to like really understand what the interactions are. And I think too often what happens is leaders, manage via the metrics.
Yeah.
And the problem is like the metrics can tell you something's sliding, but then to fix it, you kind of got to throw the data away and you got to go in and like look at the anecdata about, what's happening, with these metrics. And so over time, what happened, like it started with me going in and sort of like going into every single Slack message about like a negative CSAT score in support and tagging support managers and directors and Hussam, the person who runs support, on like what's going on, we need to fix this and this seems like a problem and so on and so forth. And eventually what happened over time is the support org took that over. And sort of there was a time when I sort of challenged them like, hey, I want you guys to be in these exception, do the exception handling before I get there. And so, get into the negative CSAT scores and start addressing them with managers, with reps, like before, like I find it. And that, getting that sort of like that culture of like swarming, whenever there was a negative CSAT score, and jumping in and fixing the problem, I think is a really important sort of like cultural thing for support organizations.
And another cultural thing you mentioned was, so in the early days, you mentioned everyone was doing support. I'm curious today are there any other people than the support team that are still involved with support? And related question, how often do you go in the support queue today?
So I no longer go in the actual queue. And so, but I get people that reach out to me like the way, when I do it, it's usually on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And so I get, and it's why I leave my title like that. What's happened is probably like our systems have sort of like I wouldn't know like how to, like if I was dropped in like the Salesforce Service Cloud queue, like exactly sort of how to manage it. But when people reach out to me as a one-off, like I try and sort of solve the problem end to end and sort of go and say like, okay, I'm going to put on my like support hat now. And sometimes I refer it to teams internally when it makes sense, but sometimes I'll just try and work through it with them, and I'll even share them like, okay, here's like the screenshot from my account on like where you can go to do this, and like this is how you use the product in this way.
One thing that's really top of mind for anyone that's thinking about customer support is AI. I think, we hear about AI, a lot of things, but I think everyone agrees on the fact that AI is going to disrupt customer support. Like we see at Front, we invest a lot. We announced actually last week our acquisition of a company in the AI space. I'm curious for you, how do you think about AI and customer support?
I think there are a few things. One thing is actually Rippling was one of the first companies to use GPT for this. Like I think it was like 2019 or something, but we like a very early version, and we used it to route tickets. And it was a critical thing for us because at the time when we did not have a support organization and we had engineers doing support, we needed to figure out like which engineer to send it to. And so we literally had these buckets by sort of product area where it was like, okay, we had to figure out, is this a ticket about payroll? Is it a ticket about sort of single sign-on and identity, about device management, about health insurance? Within payroll, is it a ticket about deductions? Is it a ticket about taxes? And there were literally like different people that it would go to within the organization. And that was the thing that kind of made that system work for us for a while, because you weren't going to, customers weren't going to a quote unquote professional support person. They were going to an engineer that often lacked like the bedside manner that you would want with the support person, but they were getting to like the engineer that built the product that they were using. And so we would often get this feedback from customers. It was like, wow, like, I don't know about like the tone and, but man, your support reps like really know a lot about the products. It's like, yeah, because they were the people that built them. And even today, I actually think that like routing is like the superpower of like delivering good support at scale, because like what you want to do is you need to segment your tickets into ever smaller buckets so that you can get deeper and deeper and deeper expertise. and as the support organization grows, what you want is you want support reps that can just become deep product experts in a very narrow area of the product, and then route all of the support tickets to them. And it's great for everyone, because on the customer side, they get someone who has like true expertise. And on the support rep side, it's really a way for them to develop in their careers, that you start out sort of maybe answering kind of general, kind of like easy stuff, but then you start to develop this specialization. You develop a lot of expertise and a lot of like technical depth in one specific area. And that's actually what's driven like the modalities that we use for support. Like we offer phone support, but the way we offer phone support at Rippling is it starts with a chat that you then convert to a video call. And the reason that we do that is if you offer just like direct phone support, it's impossible to route it, which means that in my view, it's impossible to make it good because like you have to put someone on the phone that is like a generalist that like knows nothing, your question could be anything and they have like 30 seconds to, and like every single time when you do it that way, their answer is going to be, hold please, like let me go get the person who's the expert on that. And no one wants to sort of sit on hold like that. Versus like if you start with a chat and you just ask them like, what is your problem? And you have just one or two back and forths, you can be like, okay, I understand there's something that you're struggling with on the interface between Rippling and Guideline for your company's 401k. And we are going to get you to one of the two people in the support org that like know that integration backwards and forwards. They know everything about that specific thing, and they do that all day, every day. And you're going to have a really great experience on that stuff. And like, so routing is really important, and you can't really do it without AI. Obviously, there's case deflection that you can start doing at many sort of simple, there are many simple tickets that the AI can just respond better and faster than a human being. But then I also think there's a real, there are real internal use cases where like AI can make support reps better, both because like, customers tend to develop these long and complex histories. And if you can get an AI to sort of summarize for the rep, here's the summary of the history. And by the way, here's the summary of the history that's very, very specific to like the question that they're asking you, to sort of give you superpowers on the context around the customer. It makes support reps much better. So there are a lot of things that AI can do that are not about displacing reps, but making them much more effective. And even like the AI sort of intercepting like a response that a support rep is typing and sort of saying like, are you sure? Like, this seems like actually, this is not right. Like, I see in the help center documentation, it says something else. Are you, just like double check this. Are you sure that you want to send this to the customer? I think it can just like make reps much, 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 much better.
Yeah, I agree. That's what we see at France. Like the simple things can be deflected, the more complex things can be assisted. And then there is such a nice feedback loop between like the AI and the humans, where everything that the humans has ever answered can train, create new articles, etc. And I think it will make everyone's job more pleasant, and it will be a better experience for customers. I could ask you so many more questions, because every time I ask you a question, you have so many insights that I'm sure everyone knows here. And I want to be cognizant of time. Therefore, I'm just going to end with a rapid fire. So 5 questions. first one is, what are the hardest types of questions to answer in Rippling support queue?
Usually the ones, I think there's a few. One is where we don't have enough information from the customer to really understand what happens. And another is like, there's something wrong, but we have to sort of reverse engineer like how things kind of got into that situation. And then another one that's challenging specifically for us are the ones that are like inherently cross-functional, that sit kind of at the intersection of like a couple of different sort of specialties, because it messes with our sort of specialization model, where it's like, it looks like a payroll deductions question, but actually it's fundamentally about like insurance enrollments or so, and so it gets routed to a person that like is trying to solve it around, but actually the problem sits somewhere else. Those are always the hardest, and those are the things that tend to involve like a couple different back and forths.
Yep, makes sense. What are the most important qualities in a support agent?
My view of this is curiosity. The ability, really wants to understand products and problems and solve problems very deeply. But the second thing that I think is often overlooked is really like reading comprehension. And like sometimes like, like a lot of times when I see tickets where the response from our support rep is problematic, the reason is like they didn't fully read the question, or like they didn't understand exactly what they were asking, and they sort of answered something or proposed like a solution that wasn't totally like what the situation. And it was like, if you read it a little more carefully, if you read between the lines, you can tell like that actually this is the problem. And so that real sort of like deep reading comprehension and customer empathy that's required to sort of be like, like I see what they're actually asking, or I see like what the real problem is. I think that's what distinguishes like the truly great support reps from the more mediocre ones.
Outside of Rippling, who would you say has the best support team? You can't say front.
Man, I'm not totally sure actually. I don't interact with support in a
That's
lot
okay.
of systems. I'm not sure of a great, I mean, Zappos by reputation, but like, I don't actually have a great answer on that one.
So Zappos, that's our next guest, actually.
Oh,
So I'm
great.
happy you said this, but that was actually my last rapid fire question. Who should be our next guest? It can't be Zappos. So maybe that's another trick question.
It can't be Zappos. You know what I think would be interesting is actually if you guys had Hussam on, who runs the support org at Rippling.
Yeah.
And you could get his take, and sort of, because I have one perspective as a CEO who cares a lot about this, and then Hussam is on the other end of this. And I think it would be really interesting to hear like almost like the juxtaposition of the two.
I love it. I'm going to ask just one question that was asked in the chat, which is, what specific support metric are you most proud of and why? And I'll start, like for us, I'm actually curious. The thing that we track at Front on top of some of the things you've mentioned is our CSAT. We have like most months have 100% CSAT, and it's always between like 97 and 100%. So we care a lot about CSAT. We display it, track it, post it also in our channels when they're not good. But curious, like, what's the one you're most proud of?
I mean, the one I'm most proud of is time to first response. Rippling is a little bit different than other software systems in that, there's a lot of timeline pressure that our clients are under. Like if you're trying to run payroll and something's wrong, there's a deadline. It's like, if you don't submit it by 2:30 p.m., like we cannot get the money, to the Federal Reserve to get it to your employees in time. And so you start running into those limits. And so, people want to be able to reach someone very, very fast. And so just the fact that we can tell people like, look, if you have a problem, you're going to be able to be connected with a payroll specialist at Rippling in, the median time is 20 seconds and the 90th percentile is like a minute and a half. I think that gives people a lot of confidence.
Great. Is there one last thing that you want to leave the audience with? Last word of wisdom on this topic of customer support?
I think publishing your stats is a great idea. I think everyone should do it. I hope it becomes a norm in the industry. I think it's incredibly powerful. And for those of you guys who are support leaders on the call, I think it actually really elevates the support function because it forces a lot of executive attention on those underlying metrics. And it's really like a powerful thing for doing support well in your company. And I think it's also great from recruiting, from a recruiting perspective. I think, you can sort of point to your company as like, look, hey, we're at the vanguard of sort of how do you do support well? And like, what are the things that are important for doing great support?
I love it. Parker, thank you so much for having spent the time. I'm super impressed with you and your company. And I'm sure everyone who's listened has learned at least 10 very valuable things. So thank you. And thanks everyone for listening in.
Thanks.